Hello, it's lovely to have you both here today, Jacqui and Jasper. Jacqui, many of us know. Jasper is the author of the book, in which he's going to read a short extract, the story of a man who's lived with a diagnosis of schizophrenia for about 20 years. And as we just heard, it's a very compelling and a very real, feels like a very real depiction of the struggles that he goes through over the course of a period of a year in his life. So Jasper, when you're ready, perhaps you could kick off and read us the extract you've chosen.
Sure. The door widens. A head floats in and says, "Mr. Tuplow," before pulling its body into the room. This is the research assistant. He seems a little thrown by finding me in the doctor's chair, but drops himself neatly next to Megan, channeling all his researchable assistant energy into a smile. A smile that says, "Okay, we're doing it like this, are we? Well, okay then, why not? Yes, why not? Hooray for us." My knee is bouncing at incredible speed. So my name is Richard, and first off, thank you for coming in today. Hello, Richard. I'm trying to copy his smile. And thank you for coming in today. Now, Megan, your CC here has indicated to me that you might be willing to take part in trials for bildarnocycline. Is that right? The warm patch has slipped away into my leg. He is continuing to grant me this indulgence, and I mouth a silent prayer of thanks, my chest gathering with a light, playful sensation because Richard looks a bit thick. He is young and has a surprised, baggy face like a puppy. There are visible comb tracks in his white blonde hair, and from across this desk, I imagine Megan as Richard's mother, bringing in her delusional son for a checkup. He thinks he's some kind of doctor. Now then, Richard, I say, stretching my arms out across this desk, fanning my fingers, getting comfortable with its supreme power. Can I call you Dickie? Tom, but Megan is stifling a smile. Oh, Megan, your long, straight, greying hair. Do you comb it by a waterfall? So, replies Richard, ignoring the question, reasserting himself in his chair. Today is just a preliminary chat to assess your suitability for the trial. Are you okay with me asking you some questions this morning? He is trying to nod a response out of me. Megan narrows her eyes. I nod back, slowly, and Dickie ticks something. Good Lord. You live at number 1 Etchingham House, Meadowside Close, Crowborough, and you live by yourself. Is that all correct? And you've had a schizophrenia diagnosis for 19 years? I don't have schizophrenia, but you are taking clozapine regularly. I don't want to lie in front of Megan, so I say, I have a clozapine prescription, yes. And how long have you been taking clozapine for? 8 years. I started on 75 milligrams a day, and because it doesn't work, I'm now on 500 milligrams a day. And do you know why they put you on clozapine? Lithium carbonate, sodium valproate, sertraline, fluoxetine made me suicidal, olanzapine, largactil, risperidone, and amylsulpride either didn't work or made me feel worse. Pills or injection. I used to need depot injection, but I've got so much wonderfully, marvelously better at compliance, haven't I, nurse? And now you don't feel suicidal? How long will this assessment take? He's joking, says Megan. So, nothing's worked. Stelazine works, but they won't give me stelazine. Dr. Sheldrake doesn't think it's appropriate, says Megan. Could you ask Megan what that actually means, appropriate? Because I pick up the empty pen holder. It has a red ceramic base with a black plastic sheath attached to it by some kind of swiveling nut. Replacing it carefully in the middle of the desk, I take a deep breath. What happened, Richard, was that once upon a time I was in a bad way, a very bad way, and we couldn't get to see anyone, so my sister takes me to this private doctor who gives me stelazine, and it was, I summon the right word down from the ceiling, miraculous. But Sheldrake was so angry with his doctor for undermining his treatment plan, he refuses to prescribe it, even though it actually works, even though it's the one thing that stops me triggering. Richard is tapping his pen against his lips, as if ruminating on my situation, yet in this pause I've afforded him for comment, he remains utterly mute. That, Dickie, is what happens when everyone's opinion on your life is more valuable than your own. Oh, now, says Megan, looking at me with conciliation, because she too knows Sheldrake's a bastard, though politics forbids her from confessing it. That's quite a long history of medication, says Dick. Can I ask you what you're taking it all for if you don't have schizophrenia? Fear. General fear? Private fear. Reporting for duty. I'm Black Ops, deep black, Tom. Okay. You might call it anxiety disorder. Could you go into a little more detail, please? Leaning forward, my hands now trying to join each other from within their pockets. A little more detail. This sweat across the tops of my cheeks, this bouncing knee, this clenched jaw, and yet how I am with these two, this clowning, this show. I say, no. You're not able to, or you'd rather not? Oh, Richard, Dick, I want you to imagine seeing a child, let's say your own child, any child, it doesn't matter, running out into the road. The child steps back, the car misses him, but you are trapped in that wild, unraveling moment forever. And there is an entire bureaucracy of suffering dedicated to helping you, but the only answer they've got is get rid of the child.
Thank you. So that introduces us to Tom Tutlow, who you can get the sense from that extract is someone who retains his spirit and his sense of black humour despite everything he's struggling with. Thank you for that. And I wanted to just start off, Jasper, by asking you something that I'm sure many other people have already asked you, which is, I know that this story appealed to you because it has some links with your cousin, I believe, who went through some similar difficulties.
Yeah.
Are you able to say a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. It's very much inspired the life of my cousin Ed, who was a voice hearer. He just dropped dead after at the age of 40 for no apparent reason, though he had also been on clozapine for many, many years. And as I just read actually in the book, you know, because it wasn't working, they just kept upping the dose. His death really was my kind of through the looking glass moment. I think until then, I'd like most people, I had just kind of had to receive wisdom of what he was going through. I didn't really question that he had an illness that was an imbalance in brain chemistry called schizophrenia, and it was really when we were cleaning up his flat, and we found this great pile of paper, and we knew he'd always talked about writing a book himself. And as I am a writer, one of the things I thought I could do to kind of help the situation is just type up these bits of paper, and perhaps there'd be a book in them, because it was a pile of paper almost up to my shoulder. And as I went through it, there was a story in there. I mean, it was a pile of paper of train tickets, takeaway menus, unopened bills, anything but a clean sheet of paper. But by the end of this pile, there was about a chapter's worth of a story about a young man starting work at a sawmill, which is something that he did when a younger man. But that led me really to his notebooks, and it was in his notebooks that I found these accounts of him trying to write his way out of an attack by the spiritual being that was the voice that he heard. And that's when that was the first moment, I think, when I thought, well, I've never really read about this experience from the inside in fiction. And it was true then, and it's still true today, with some notable exceptions, that in books and film, the depictions of voice hearers or people with schizophrenia diagnosis always seem to be either violent psychopaths or a kind of village idiot with one magical power in the Rain Man model. And I thought, well, maybe I could help to try and commemorate my cousin's life in some small way by writing a book that was a more human, nuanced portrayal of someone with those sorts of challenges.
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes the book really a very welcome, refreshing change, to be honest, because it's not a standard mental health, this person has a medical illness book, although it's not, putting forward an explicit message in some senses. I think we very much get the sense that his voices are meaningful, and that the book draws, I know, on the wisdom of people with lived experience of voice hearing, including Jacqui. So
absolutely,
you were able to talk with Jasper a lot, I think, about non-medical ways of understanding voice hearing. And How was
Yeah,
that?
you know, in the beginning of my research process, quite quickly, I heard Jacqui's name come up time and time again, and they'd say, "Have you spoken to Jacqui Dillon?" So
Right.
I tried to track her down and sort of dog her until she'd agreed to meet me, which she did, and it was really yeah, we were going to meet for a quick chat, and that just turned into a long chat, and then a friendship, and it was really Jacqui. I think that the kind of gave me that sense of freedom, I think, about what I was doing, and you know, the sort of first important lesson that I got from Jacqui was that there is no quote unquote getting it right. You know, as someone without lived experience, I was sort of desperately keen not to get it wrong. But I came away from that first conversation realizing that there is as many voicing experiences as there are voice hearers. And though I absolutely and continue to try do as much research as possible to get the procedural stuff right, what it's like being in services and benefit system, in terms of his inner life, I was, you know, free to draw on the imagination, and that was immensely liberating. And I think that was really the moment where I thought, well, I can, you know, I can do this.
One of the things that struck me as someone who's worked with a lot of voice hearers as being very realistic was the kind of relationship between Tom and the octopus god. Well, did that feel real to you, Jacqui, as someone with personal experience of this, the kind of struggles, the power relationship, what's the god doing in his life, the need for him as well as the fear of him, and so on and so on?
It really did. I mean, as Jasper said when we first met, I think it was, you know, it was a very kind of upfront conversation that Jasper had just accepted that his cousin had schizophrenia, and our initial conversations are very much around exploring that and what that meant and the validity of that, and what other ways one might understand these kinds of experiences. And then I think as we hung out more and I introduced Jasper to more people, he was very keen to chat to people and spend time with people who had a range of experiences. I think we then got much more into, and Jasper can kind of add to this because it's happened over a long period of time, but we got much more into what those kinds of relationships with these internal figures can be like. This really quite complex relationship that Tom has with his internal world, and with the voice, that the voice both of the octopus god is both incredibly punitive at points, but also has this hugely protective presence, and that actually his relationship, that Tom and Malamok, the octopus's god, is actually really complicated and multi-layered, and that's a really significant relationship, and that I think Jasper, for me, that was one of the most moving aspects of the story, the relationship with this god that has been such a key figure in Tom's life, that I guess for many people it's a voice that needs to be banished.
Yes, and certainly that's psychiatrist's view, isn't it? We medicate it away, but this was a very, very different perspective, wasn't it? And as Tom said at some point, you know, what about all the people who have religious beliefs that are accepted, and yet my belief isn't, and so on and so on.
Well, but I mean, I think it throws up lots and lots of questions, really, about what kinds of subjective experiences that culturally we allow, and others that we punish or penalise or try and control. And I think it also raises questions about, well, who is this a problem for?
Indeed. Which is a very pertinent question, isn't it? As we know, many people are in psychiatric hospital because they are disturbing to others, even if, you know, they may have valuable aspects of their experience from their point of view. So,
well, absolutely. I mean, it's clear that at points Tom is tormented, and but also that his relationship with Malamok is profoundly important to him, and that he feels lost without him. I don't know if you want to come in at this point, Jasper.
Well, it was, yeah. I mean, it's first and foremost a profound spiritual experience that he's in the grips of, and as I don't want to give too much of the book away, but when that is threatened, it's not just the experience, but his entire life, the way he draws meaning from his life, and you know, like my cousin and many people that I've now met thanks to Jacqui, and just continue to meet when talking about this book particularly, but just in general, Tom is a threat to no one. He couldn't be less violent. In fact, he spends his days walking in the woods and trying to help people in Morrison's car park. I mean, he can be annoying, but he's certainly he's certainly not threatening. But his breed of suffering, as it's seen from the outside, is not permitted, and his internal reality is not permitted, even though it draws very much from the tradition, the mythic tradition that underpins our very civilization. Malamok is a spiritual entity in the Greek mold, in the Old Testament mold, and Tom certainly struggles with this, why these traditions and myths and beliefs are accepted in certain contexts, but not within his own life, and he certainly suffers. But you know, not even just a sort of cursory glance at any religious experience, you know that spiritual experience is always painful at points if it's meaningful. It's there to transcend. It is a transcendent experience, and that most by definition means it's disruptive of ordinary life. And this is something that is Tom's living truth, and it's unacceptable even to the people that love him the most. And I was at great pains to make sure that even though you see the world through Tom's eyes, his long, beautiful, caring, compassionate sister, who is essentially trying to blackmail him emotionally into this drugs trial that he doesn't want to take a part of, is doing so from a very compassionate place. In her understanding, she's just ill. She just wants him to get better. She wants to stop looking after him because his experiences make, you know, whatever the hell ordinary life is, makes that difficult. So she doesn't have anywhere else to go except for to do what the medical profession are encouraging her to do. So she's just deferring to the experts and trying to do the best. So Tom's in an impossible situation because he's trapped between the profound love he has for his sister and the profound love he has for his God. And that's really that kind of triangle of love and those impossible choices that he's forced into, that society is forcing him into, is the heart of the book, really.
I thought that was very powerfully portrayed, actually.
I did too. I mean, it was
the best. Yeah,
it was almost like the sort of Langian, the sort of classic Langian double bind that Tom is put into, that either you sacrifice your own reality or you sacrifice the relationship that's most precious to you with your sister, who he's devoted to. And for Tom in particular, as somebody who is profoundly sensitive and compassionate and altruistic, I think that's a really terrible sort of position to be put into, to kind of do something that will hurt his sister. But then there's the kind of the flip side is then it means potentially annihilating himself, which is a kind of devastating dilemma for him to be put into, which is kind of untenable, I think, for any being, isn't it?
And that is a very, I mean, you could call that a very Langian dilemma. That's true. And I mean, you didn't make this explicit in the book, Jasper, but at various points there were sentences I really liked where Tom was saying things to his doctor like, you know, but schizophrenia isn't a real chemical thing, and there's no such thing as a chemical balance, is there?
Yeah. Well, he is, you know, he's like everyone in the system who is, you know, you're being given a label. He's extremely clever man. He's done a lot of reading. He knows his stuff. He's often in a room with people who are much younger than him and have no lived experience and have simply read a lot less. I mean, just intellectually, he outguns. And I think that's where the humor comes from, is that, you know, it's a sort of protective mechanism for him to retain some superiority when he is the brightest person in the room, but the one without any power, and who knows most, of course, about his own situation, because it's he's living it. So the absurdity of that, I think, creates the humor, the power dynamics, and that's I think one of the well springs, hopefully, of the humor. If
indeed, but it sounds like that's a position that you yourself came to during the writing of the book. Am I right that you started off with quite an orthodoxy of schizophrenia, a mental illness, needs to be treated by drugs, and you actually were exposed to views? Is that a fair point?
Well, I don't know. I mean, certainly intellectually, but I'd always been around my cousin, my uncle. There's a great deal of mental ill health or difficulties in my family, so I've always been around people who are suffering and are smart, and you can see them fighting it off with being funny. So that felt kind of sort of natural, but absolutely, it's my intellectual understanding of what it was that he was going through was very much conditioned by what I've been told, which is, you know, he did too many drugs. He just sort of did his own head in, and now he's imbalanced his own chemistry, if you like, and now he's got a disease.
Yeah. So what was it like? I'm asking this because this is a kind of journey that many of the people listening to us have been on, or will have been on, or are on, challenging what are taken as very accepted truths, like Tom's sister understandably took them as accepted truths. What was it like for you to have some of those accepted truths challenged when it was actually about someone in your family? Yeah,
it was a look through the looking glass moment, really, because it made perfect sense for what I knew about Ed, just as a person, that he wasn't ill. He was a highly intelligent, funny, engaging guy who I was having perfectly normal conversations with. Every now and again, when he also had the experience, as Tom does in the book, of seeing white light, and sometimes, you know, he'd go pale and he'd be seeing that, and and then he'd make references to his voice, and you know, he just wasn't ill, and wasn't impaired intellectually. And I mean, that's just, you know, he had lots of difficult times and episodes, but my day-to-day experience, or my kind of normal experience of seeing him, was just having a chat with someone who I knew was having this sort of experience. So to then, you know, learn what I learned, and I'd always been someone who was interested in spirituality and religion, and it just sort of made much more common sense that he didn't have, he wasn't mentally disabled. He was perhaps in touch with another dimension. Made much more sense.
I remember our initial conversation when you were telling me the very first time we met, and you were telling me about Ed, and we were talking about, I sort of floated the possibility that there was another way of understanding what had happened, and sort of broaching the subject of, that voices can be as a result of traumatic or painful things that happened in somebody's life, and the sort of spiritual frameworks. And I think what really struck me is that you were really open to that. I've had lots of conversations with people over the years raising this, as I'm sure Lucy has, that we're in a way the bearer of an alternative perspective. And sometimes people can get really angry or upset. Or
very defensive. Yeah.
Very defensive.
Yeah. A bit like Dr. Fredericks.
A bit like Dr. Fredericks, precisely, exactly that, the Dr. Fredericks, the psychiatrist in the novel, where actually the notion of sort of conceptualizing these experiences in any other way is just kind of verboten and unacceptable. And for me, that was really important and made me want to keep talking to you about it and spend time with you, because I felt just the fact that you were so open. And in a way that I think that's one of the really beautiful things about the book. I mean, I think the book's got lots to tell us about these kinds of experiences, but one of the things that I think is really precious is not only do we cause suffering to people who are already suffering greatly in the name of care and help, which I think is an absolute travesty, and I think the book makes that really, tells that story really powerfully from the inside of somebody who's trying to go along with it and trying to be good and trying to kind of do what other people are asking, but actually the cost is tremendous. But I think the other thing that's really important is that what's so often missed is these incredibly rich experiences that people are having that are profoundly meaningful, that are these kind of incredible human experiences that I think are kind of wondrous. This relationship that
absolutely, yeah.
They're wondrous.
Well, absolutely.
And it breaks my heart that we're not kind of going, that's extraordinary.
Well, I had a really telling moment was when I was researching the drug on which my fictional drug, bildianocycline, is based. I went up to where that trial was happening, and the book is, I take the outline. The characters are different, the setting, the story is nothing to do with my cousin, but what I took from my cousin was the structure. One voice, self-identifies as a spiritual being, sees white light, sometimes golden light, and has this physical physical sensation of warm love down one side of his body if the voice is happy, and kind of electric shocks and a harsh physical sensation down the other when the octopus god is unhappy. And I have since met and got in touch with a couple of people who have exactly the same structure, which I find fascinating. So there's a particular guy who I found a book that he'd written and self-published. It's called Ed Penny, and he's written about his, he's got a similar structure. He hears one voice that is a spiritual being that communicates him through touching physical sensations inside the body. Anyway, I found this absolutely sort of fascinating, obviously, that there may be a sort of subset of experiences that have these commonalities. And while I was talking to the guy who ran this trial, I said, well, and this trial had, I don't know, 10,000 people. I mean, it was in the thousands of people. And so I said, oh, like, if you've got this many, have you, so I've just come across this. I've now known my cousin, 2 other people, similar thing. Have you, and it's, you know, he's an absolutely charming man, couldn't have been nicer. And I said, have you come across anyone in all your thousands who has a similar sort of experience? Because it seems like this is a sort of like subset kind of group. And he kind of warmly patted me on the arm and said, oh, we don't care about that sort of stuff. You know, it's like, they're ill. You know, we're looking for the chemical thing. So this, yeah, you know, and it's incredible how it seems like every 10 years this, I just saw one recently, I don't know if you've seen it, that it's being scratched by a cat that gives you, you know,
there's always a new theory.
Yeah, that thing of someone, that pattern of someone somewhere who hears voices or something, has some other condition, is given antibiotics for athlete's foot or whatever it is, or had been scratched by a cat. Once they're treated for cat scratch, and this is what's just happened. I read this a couple of weeks ago, and their voices disappeared. Then suddenly billions of millions of pounds are released to investigate cat scratch as causing schizophrenia.
I think my favourite one was that too much masturbation causes schizophrenia, which was discovered by Dr. Rudolph Wank.
Wonder where he got that idea from.
I mean, I laugh, but actually it's kind of heartbreaking that what we're talking about is actually trying to kind of abolish people's like subjective realities as being
we'll do anything. We'll do anything other than listen to people's experience.
And it's a philosophical problem, isn't it? Because if your basic training and your entire worldview is materialist and behaviorist, then all you're looking at is the material and the behavior. So you're looking at the blueprint of a cathedral. It's not going to tell you anything about what believing in God feels like, or but all the emphasis is always on, can we get a better and better blueprint of the building, and can we get more and more in-depth picture of what the building looks like, but not what happens inside it, what the experience of being inside it.
I think that's the gap that your book really does a very good job of filling. That's why it's so important and appealing. And
thank you.
Wrap up in a minute, but if there's anything either of you would like to say just briefly about what you'd really like people to take from the book, assuming they're all going to rush off and buy it and are already ordering it on Amazon on their phones.
Well, I'd like to say, as somebody who met Jasper and has been part of the journey of sort of, you know, this story played a small part in this story being told. I mean, for people who know me, I wouldn't be here kind of talking about a book unless I thought it was a really important book. And I think if you're somebody who has these experiences, if you're interested in these kinds of experiences, if you love people, work with, then I think the Octopus God, if you're interested in understanding more about human experience, because for me, one of the things that being closer to extreme, what we call mad experience, what it allows us to do is understand more about the breadth and range and the extreme kinds of human experience, which tells us all something about what it means to be human, I think.
Yeah, it's not those people over there who are mentally ill, it's all of us, isn't it? It's all of us.
It's all of us, and I think what the book invites us to do is actually, and this is probably what enables Jasper to write so successfully about this subject, is to locate ourselves on that continuum of human experience. What might it be like to have these intense experiences? And when in my life have I had experiences that might be akin to this, or that I can draw from, so that I can humanize it and it can become more understandable? And I think if we can understand each other better, then surely that's a good thing, particularly if we're in these kind of extreme places in our lives and in ourselves.
You want to add anything to that, Jasper?
Yeah, just to say, thank you so much for inviting me on today, and thank you, Jacqui, for your help and friendship. And I just wanted to leave the last thought, perhaps, to my cousin. You know, it's very exciting for me to finally have this kind of book out there. And if it can help to commemorate his life in a small way, then great, because he was an extraordinary person.
Thank you. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Lucy. Lovely to see you.